It looks like the talks at Stormont will be ramped up a level this week with the expected arrival of the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach. It's understood David Cameron and Enda Kenny are making themselves available to attempt to broker a solution to the deadlock. And with the lure of corporation tax powers being devolved and a de facto deadline of Christmas, time is very short. The Taoiseach laid out his stall on Friday at a North-South ministerial meeting in Armagh.
The government, the Taoiseach and I on behalf of the government, will support every move and encourage every move to move this process forward. I expect to be back here in Northern Ireland next week with the Prime Minister, and hopefully that the possibilities that are now on the table can actually be moved forward to an acceptable conclusion for everybody.
Also in the mix is the peace bond claimed by both the DUP and Sinn Féin as their idea for promoting reconciliation in the face of the big spending cuts.
On that basis, the Finance Minister had put a proposal at an earlier stage where he was indicating that there was the potential of us building up a fund with the European Investment Bank's involvement that would allow us to draw down funds probably maybe 10 times what we actually put in the first instance. If it is for a good cause, and the good cause will be about peace and reconciliation, about dealing with the horrors of our past and ensuring that we have in the future young people growing up in a society of which they can all be proud. So into that kind of fund, there is no conflict or contradiction for Her Majesty's government in doing something particular for Northern Ireland that it is not doing for other parts of the United Kingdom because of the uniqueness of our set of circumstances.
I am in dispute with the British government and the strategy that they have deployed in failing thus far to recognise the very special pressures and circumstances that exist in the north of Ireland, which do not exist in Scotland, Wales, London or the north of England.
Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson also speaking in Armagh. My guests of the day will have plenty to say about that, I imagine. Newton, Emerson, let's talk first of all about this Peace and Investment Fund. More special pleading?
Well, no, it's pretty obvious that a deal has been done because you don't bring the Prime Ministers over to preside over failure. But money is going to be the crux of this agreement. Everything else, I think, will just be fudged. So I would imagine that because it's a deal, there's going to have to be some give and take on all sides. And so this is going to be the British government.
Has actually been done at this stage, or just that the mood music is not bad for a deal to be done?
No, I think that the optics and the timetable indicate that they have cooked up enough to present it as success, certainly to meet George Osborne's requirement of success to get the budget moving onwards. But there's going to have to be some give from the British government, or something that can be presented as not a complete fallback on money by the DUP and Sinn Féin, and this is it. This fund is it.
Do you get some sense that there is more agreement than perhaps we saw some months ago?
I don't know. Look, I mean, the Taoiseach has cleared the diaries. I think the big issue is going to be, is Cameron going to come with his chequebook, and if so, how much will be given? You're right, it is going to be, money is going to be the crux of the deal, and for all of the issues surrounding these talks, really it's coming down to the budget and to welfare reforms. I think the idea of a peace fund is very, very attractive, as long as it isn't just money by another name coming into the north. Well,
what about the Irish Exchequer? Is it going to be able to pay into this investment fund? Because that's what they're talking about, the British government, the Irish government, the EU and the American government.
Well, at a time when the Irish government is absolutely convulsed by water charges and the prospect of 100,000 people piling outside the Oireachtas on Wednesday. It is an interesting concept, the idea of a peace fund and that ability to leverage even more funds, but I don't know if that's the solution. I think that when we're talking about money, the big issue here in the north is welfare reform. Yeah,
it certainly is the big issue, and there are people who will tell you that in the margins they can find a way of squaring that circle. But are you suggesting, Newton, that you think the mood music is good on some of those seemingly intractable issues like flags, parades in the past? Or are you simply talking about the financial side of things?
Simply the financial side. I think that those other issues will be fudged.
So they're not going to be resolved, you don't think, this week?
I wouldn't have thought so. Or they'll present some kind of a deal, but it won't be resolved. But there is a logic to this. Sinn Féin and the DUP can argue about flags and parading forever. In fact, that's almost the reason for existence. But it's when the money runs out and they face losing their platform and their income to have those arguments that they really start to move. There's a great irony here hear that for 15 years money was thrown at Stormont to make it work, but it's finally when the money runs out that you actually see a new kind of negotiation and politics happening.
Dearbhail?
Yeah, I think it's going to be finance first, the budget's welfare reform, and that will actually be the building block or the foundation stone for all of the other issues being addressed. I think that those issues can be tailored or sold, the messages can be packaged in such a way, but this is the big issue for the North. In the Republic where I live, we've had it for 6 years. The IMF took away all of our decision to be angsty about it and to debate about it, and I think that the North's moment has come in terms of a budget.
Dearbhail, McDonald and Newton Emerson. Newton, do these cuts in further and higher education make any sense to you?
Well, they may not be very strategic, but there is a point that Joanne's being a bit diplomatic here. There is a point in her report that has been overlooked by everyone, which is she identified that universities here cost about a third more per undergraduate they put through for no identifiable reason. And I believe our universities spend about £200 million, so there's a massive saving to be made there. Yeah, revenue raising is fine. Probably high salaries and over-administration, although it wasn't clear, but it's their job to start drilling that down, and perhaps a bit of discipline would help them do it. I think there's another interesting wrinkle in the fees issue, which is that they are devolved and work in exactly the same way as welfare reform. We can have a different system from England, but we have to pay for it from the block grant. And it is very interesting that we were able to effectively block student fees without any of the political controversy we've had over blocking welfare reform. I know that this is not a purely middle-class interest, but it's certainly not the most vulnerable you're talking about here when you're talking about university students. And we were able to help them without any political controversy. In fact, I believe the funding to do this was taken off support for the long-term unemployed.
Dearbhail, what's your perspective on it? Because, of course, there's a huge crossover between students from the north going to colleges in the south and vice versa. We had the Minister just last week saying he wants £7 million from the Republic's government for students from the Republic of Ireland who are attending further education colleges in the north. And
I was one of them. I was one of those students who from the north who went down south. It's interesting on the corporation tax, because one of the successes of the Celtic Tiger, the real Celtic Tiger, the first one before it was replaced by the property boom, was our corporation tax. But aligned with that, which was a very young, talented skill force and a very strategically talented skill force in those STEM areas, in other areas. And it seemed that part of that ingredients for economic success was those two factors. And it would seem a real contradiction if the North is going to agitate for a devolved corporation tax and the right to set those things, and then it's just going to send, as we have in recent years in the Republic, just send all our young people abroad. There's something very, very counterintuitive and counterproductive against it, especially when Northern Ireland is going to try and sell itself as a low corporate tax base, but meanwhile all of our young students are going to be missing out.
I think a lot of people struggle to understand the logic on this. You can perpetually go round in circles, can't you, Newton?
Well, we don't have a strategic, sort of overarching kind of cabinet government. Decisions are taken by Sinn Féin and the DUP via the Ministry of Finance, and then everyone else has to basically suck it up. So especially when you're talking about next year's budget, which is a one-off budget because of the extension of the Assembly term, they're just winging it. They're just planning it on the hoof.
Mark Devonport reporting now. Final word from Dearbhail and Newton. Let's have a conversation about political leadership. No secret that there's a difficulty between Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, and yet seemingly at every time of crisis they pop up at some kind of press launch for some sporting event.
I mean, Peter Robinson seems to thrive on this kind of absolute last-minute brinkmanship, and the rugby announcement is one of the strongest indicators that the two of them have cooked up something. You can also see that this creates an argument for the Casement Park extension, which is possibly something that Sinn Féin will consider to be a positive in the deal too.
Interesting. Dearbhail, they are standing shoulder to shoulder as the anthem goes.
Absolutely. And I think what people find quite difficult is that here they are, their opponents, and especially with Sinn Féin and Fine Gael in the Republic at the moment, and yet politicians have an ability, they can actually taste and smell money and success, because obviously the Rugby World Cup on an all-island basis was something that would be hugely successful, would bring in a lot of good money and a lot of good publicity. And I think people are kind of just amused by how they can be at loggerheads on one issue, including the budget north and south, and yet can seem to be shoulder by shoulder.
But maybe that's what politics is about. Maybe that's what we need from our political leaders, to be able to make that transition.
And Peter Robinson 3 years ago seemed to be developing this sort of strategic progressive vision for unionism, and then the flag protests happened and is deteriorated into this kind of desperate firefighting. But that has now brought us to this point where it appears to have worked. And you have to wonder, was that what was necessary? And when you think that, you realise Peter Robinson is probably the only leader in unionism who could do this, who could have kept a lid on the marching season with this graduated rapid response thing, whatever it is, over the summer, and kept this loose coalition together up to this point. It's very unattractive, but it does seem to work.
Dearbhail, a word about the amount of southern engagement in northern politics at the moment. It's pretty significant, and I know you've been speaking to the Irish Foreign Minister recently about what's been happening and what might be about to happen, so I don't know if you can share any of that with us.
I spoke to Minister Charlie Flanagan yesterday. He's actually off to China, but they're deeply invested in this. They're very, they're very committed in terms of this week, but I think that in terms of the Irish interest, they're very determined that something happens this side of Christmas. It's very important that we don't let it slide.
Here's the interesting thing, very briefly. Sworn enemies as far as southern politics are concerned, and yet theoretically on the same side of the table in the north.
Yeah, well, I think the north and south are quite different. Obviously, there is almost like a catatonic fear of the progress of Sinn Féin in the Republic, but I think when it comes to the north, they have to be. We're co-sponsors, the Irish Government is co-sponsors of the Good Friday Agreement. They have to be seen to be supporting the institutions.
The worst body language at the talks was between Enda Kenny and Martin McGuinness.
Yes, and I suppose we shouldn't be surprised about that, should we?
No.
What do you think the body language will be like, just briefly, this week, if they are engaged in the same process in the north?
Well, I mean, the way these deals work is once they've decided to go with it, it's all smiles and handshakes. It's in with both feet. So we'll get that. If a deal has been done, it will all be presented as very glossy and it's all smiles and handshakes.
But always with the north, it's whatever about agreeing a deal, it's implementing it.
Isn't it
That's
just? OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.